everyone. Thank you for joining me for this session of Altius Interviews. My name is Stephanie Dorwart, and I am the owner and CEO of Altius Healthcare Consulting Group. And I am joined today by a great friend and colleague, Mike Evans. Mike is a managing partner of Revenue Cycle Solutions. He brings extensive leadership experience in healthcare operations and revenue cycle management. He's a seasoned healthcare executive with CEO and COO experience in hospitals and healthcare systems of varying size and complexity. And he's led several successful hospital turnarounds, as well as several successful revenue cycle projects at hospitals of all sizes. They increase revenue, drive cultural transformation, and ultimately improve the financial performance of all the organizations that they work with. Mike, it's a pleasure to have you here today, and I can't wait to share your areas of expertise and share more with our audience.
Good to be with you as always. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation.
It's going to be a lot of fun. In order to get started, Mike, can you just share a little bit about your career journey and how you ultimately ended up in revenue cycle management?
Happy to. Actually, I've spent most of my career in hospital operations, either as a CEO of some of the smaller hospitals in Western Pennsylvania or as a vice president of operations in a few larger ones. And then over a period of time, actually, when I was the CEO of one of my small hospitals, I brought in the company that I own now to help turn around the revenue cycle. And Dan Theory, who's a co-manager with me, we've been friends ever since. And after he helped me, I made some referrals to him and was able to generate some business for him. And so over the course of time, as things change, as you know, in our business, it was in about 2012, he called me and wanted me to commit to the organization as the COO, which I did. And I did that for about 3 years. And then the allure of the hospital world called me back. So I went into the hospital world and hospital operations as a vice president of Jefferson Hospital in Pittsburgh and stayed there for 3 years. And then Dan called me again and said, would you like to come in and be a co-owner with me of this company? And so that's what I did about 7.5 years ago. And those travels just reminded me of an expression that I just discovered a few days ago. It's this: careers are a jungle gym, not a ladder. Okay. And so, I think the days of, maybe direct trajectory from, frontline positions all the way up to CEO, I don't know that exists anymore. It's such a dynamic environment. I think you have to be adaptable and flexible and be able to pivot as necessary. So that's how I ended up where I am right now.
That's a fantastic saying. I love that the career is a jungle gym, not a direct ladder. And, Mike, in today's environment, I cannot think of too many people I know that have just done the traditional climb up that ladder. They move from organization, sometimes laterally, sometimes taking a step back, sometimes completely trampolining forward, and a lot move in and out of consulting like you described.
Well, plus you're trying to balance a lot of things, work-life balance and family and the like. And, it depends upon opportunities that are presented to you, whether you want to take them or not. And it was a bit of a challenge for me to jump into this consulting world because I never thought. In fact, when I was in the hospital world, I was kind of consultant averse, thinking we could do it all ourselves. But over a period of time, I realized this business is too complicated to be able to have your finger on the pulse of everything.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think we can, both agree that right now it's even more volatile than it's ever been. And, hospitals and executives that we talk to consistently are going through challenges that they never experienced before. So I know you've led in a lot of high stakes situations in a lot of difficult environments. What have been some of those most defining moments or experiences?
Well, I'd say the most defining as well as most enjoyable was my first hospital CEO job at Highlands Hospital in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. In fact, it was the first hospital divested from state ownership to private ownership, where it became a part of the Forbes Health System. And it was a complete turnaround situation where even under cost-based reimbursement, this particular hospital was losing money. And with the help of the staff at Forbes, over a period of time, I'd say over about 2 to 3 years, we were able to turn it around. And that was a lot of fun. It was challenging, but it was fun, primarily working with the department directors and managers to put some new systems and processes in place, and to really build a strong culture within the organization that I think extended out into the community itself. I think for many years and still is viewed as a valuable health resource.
Yeah, you mentioned culture, and I think we've talked about that many times, how important the culture of the organization is, and it really sets the tone. And in financial turnarounds, you can't have a financial turnaround
Well,
without a
it's
strong
very true,
culture.
particularly in smaller places. And I've said this before, and I know you and I have talked about this. These small hospitals, and this CEO job that I took at Highlands Hospital was back in 1985. And even back then, small hospitals were what I consider to be the mine canaries of this business. And they still are in terms of the challenges that they face, because what happens to a smaller place, it has an instant impact, okay? Because you have very little in the way of margin, you have limited resources. So it really is a challenge and to me, I think that's a real test of leadership, to be able to do more with less, explain to your staff why sacrifices are being made, why things are the way they are, and why you're an important asset to the community. So while it was very enjoyable, it definitely had its challenges.
And I think what you were mentioning there when you talked about the fact that how important a small hospital is to the community. When you're looking at rural areas, critical access hospitals, usually they're the number one or number two largest employer in that area. And if that hospital actually closes, or if something were to happen to take it out of that community, all of a sudden, all of those jobs have been vacated, which then impacts the restaurants and everything else that those workers were eating at, the stores that they were frequenting. And so I know you've had experience with being in, some of those situations when you were the hospital CEO of a hospital that unfortunately was forced to close. Can you walk us through what happened? How did it occur? What that entire situation was like?
Certainly. And I think here that, past is prologue in my mind, because, what happened a number of years ago is happening continually now throughout the country. And I think we're in some uncharted territory right at this moment in terms of the new administration, this Department of Governmental Efficiency, looking at Medicaid cuts. This is really going to be put a real strain on hospitals. But back in the day, this was in about 2006 to 2008. It was Brownsville General Hospital in Brownsville. And I knew going in that it was going to be a difficult turnaround situation. And so initially, I just cut expenses as much as I possibly could. And I realized that cost cutting your way to success and future viability it's not sustainable. And when I made all those cost cuts, the board of directors actually thought, oh, this guy's terrific. But then when I came forth with a plan to consider merging with another local hospital, they were averse to it. And so, over the course of time, I tried my best to really bring the two hospitals together. We had worked out strategic plans, and it was a viable solution based primarily on what the market was telling us at that time. The metrics were telling us that inpatient volume was not sustainable because it was declining so rapidly. And my plan was to get out of the inpatient business, let this other hospital we were going to merge with handle that. It wasn't that far away. And we would focus on the things the market was telling us was needed. Outpatient care, ambulatory services, your lab, x-ray, urgent care, surgical care, and mental health services would have been the right way to go. And then what happened was that, and I use this phrase quite frequently, the board was insistent on trying to recapture the past. And this was a little bit before, we're right about the time that merger mania was really taking place, where everybody was looking at, are we sustainable and should we merge? And so the board decided, well, we're only a few physicians away from what I call recapturing the past, gaining that inpatient volume back. You can't get there from here anymore. Okay, I think it takes, and as much as I tried to paint a vision of a preferred future, it was just foreign to them. They could not comprehend us not being an inpatient hospital. And then over a period of time, it ended up closing because it was not sustainable. One of my mantras was, we want jobs and services in this community on this particular campus. And unfortunately, now they have nothing. Once a hospital is closed, people find other ways to healthcare. So that's exactly what happened. So it's and again, my company right now does a lot of work with critical access hospitals, rural emergency hospitals, and they are fighting for their survival. And through the work we do, we're trying to help them, survive to see a better day or fight another day, and see where that takes them. But I don't, standing alone anymore is very difficult.
I would agree with that, Mike. I know that both of our companies are very united on our missions, where we want to make sure that every community continues to have a thriving hospital or healthcare organization to meet their needs and to keep their doors open. And so with that in mind, you mentioned the one closing. What do you think are the biggest financial challenges in hospitals and healthcare providers? And when you're going into these organizations currently in the critical access hospitals, a small rural, what are they facing right now? What are the biggest challenges that they need to address?
Well, from my perspective, I mean, it's a very, very complicated equation. Okay, in terms of, but I should say it's a simple equation, but hard to solve. Okay, you need to have more revenues than expenses, and you look at what's happening with labor expenses. Labor's not getting any cheaper. Okay, and I know you and I talk about labor optimization and workflow redesign and those kind of things. And it's, for these smaller places, it's hard because we've been cutting expenses. And I've been in the business 40 years. We've been cutting expenses, for 30 of those years at least. And it just continues unabated. We're just expected, particularly in the hospital world, to cut more and more and more. And so, that's hard to do. So, from my perspective, what my company does, we try to focus on revenue enhancement. Revenue cycle is an important piece of the equation. And what we see many times is that hospitals don't even review their charge description master, which includes all their pricing, for years. And then payer contracts are important in terms of trying to renegotiate those the best you can to be competitive and comparable in your particular market. Now, easier said than done because typically most hospitals only know their rates. Okay, but the insurance companies, they know everybody's rates. So you have to be able to put forth a pretty strong value proposition. What does your hospital mean in the market? What differentiates you? What are your areas of excellence, service lines that are most important to the community? And I mean the challenges are endless. I mean, again, you're looking at. There's never going to be more money in the system.
You mentioned that, our two businesses are complementary in the fact that you're working on the revenue side of the equation. We work on the personnel and the expense side of the equation. And you touched upon the salary escalation that healthcare has seen. There's been huge salary escalations, huge workforce shortages, a lot more travelers. But the fact remains, the compensation ratio, which is the marriage of your personnel expenses or the ratio of your personnel expenses and your revenue cycle, continues to be the single indicator that's going to show, do you have a positive operating margin or better, and what's your trajectory for the future?
Yeah, what's the metric you usually use, Stephanie? Is it? I think it was in the low 40s. I think if your labor expenses are 40% or more of your overall revenues or expenses, you have work to do.
The number is 40%. If you want to be able to put enough of your operating margin back into revitalize your plant, to give consistent raises, to reinvest in your technology, it is 40%. Unfortunately, right now, the majority of hospitals and healthcare systems are north of 50. And what that means is when you take all of your personal expense, all of your budget for your benefits and all of your traveler costs, add that all together to your total personnel expense, and then put that into the net patient revenue. It tells you how many dollars of every cent that we're collecting are spent on personnel. And if that's north of 50, you're in trouble. And if it's north of 65%, you're in a really difficult situation because now you don't have enough left.
Yeah, I always think of this as a balance between safety being paramount. I mean, safety and quality of care. being paramount in
Yes.
everything that we do. You never want to jeopardize that, but with everything going on, you're trying to balance cost and morale, and that's hard to do. And I get concerned about where some of these hospitals are going or being forced to go relative to some of the safety issues.
I think the biggest issue I see right now, in the marketplace and in what's happening is, unfortunately, organizations are waiting too long to actually make changes. And the longer you wait to act, and the longer you wait to actually take a step forward to your future, not the past that you were working, you can't go back to the past, but toward the future, the more likely you are to have a reduction in force, the more likely you are to have to
Yeah,
close the facility. So, one of the messages that we make is, productivity, revenue cycle optimization can be what transforms your organization,
yeah,
but you have to start
yeah.
now. You can't wait for 3 months and see what
Right,
happens. You can't wait for 6 months. You can't wait for a year. You have to start now and use it in a way that has the positive outcomes. And that's one of the
yeah,
biggest mistakes I see with organizations
right.
is they don't act. They don't actually make
Yeah,
decisions.
indecision is an action. And all this reminds me. I came upon this years and years ago, and I actually carry this with me on a little business card. These are 6 Jack Welch rules, and I think all of this is very pertinent to our conversation. Face reality as it is, not as it was or as you wish it to be. Okay, face the hard truth about your numbers. Okay, about your financial numbers, your quality indicators. What is that saying? Okay, you got to face the hard reality. Be candid with everyone. You can't sugarcoat things. Don't manage lead. And right now, we're in a time where we require a great deal of leadership. Here's a key one: change before you have to. And that's probably the hardest one of all because people think, in fact, you should make a change before you reach your optimal performance. Okay, what's the next iteration of yourself that you're going to want to try to pursue? In fact, I participated in a seminar just a little bit ago about trying to find differentiated growth, which means other markets to
Mm,
pursue or other
yes.
services to pursue. Kind of thinking outside the box. If you don't have a competitive advantage, don't compete, and then control your own destiny, or someone else will. And right now, it's harder to do that. It's harder to control your own destiny. And I throw one in for good measure, and that is don't make hope a strategy. Oh, I hope things will get better. No, uh, you have to control your own fate and take action. I've said this many times. The numbers don't lie. Okay, look at what your numbers are telling you, and then again, be particularly attuned to what the market is saying too. What's the market telling you? What is needed from you by the market?
Control your own destiny, and hope is not a strategy. I think all 6 of those are important, but those two really stick with me right now. And so, as you're thinking about that, what are the most critical steps that organizations should take today to position them for the
Well, again,
future?
I would say, make sure you have robust metrics, okay, and pay attention to what those are. Cost cutting. I don't know how much more is left. I know you can realign your workforce, redesign it. Um, I'd look at payer contracts, have good relationships with your payers. It's almost like that relationship is a necessary evil. You have to have good relationships there and try to get the best contracts you possibly can. Again, from a self-service standpoint, I mean, we focus on the revenue cycle, everything about it. My mantra has been not only in consulting, but when I was in the hospital world, I want to get every single penny of financial credit for all the clinical work we do. So no
Oh,
stone
yeah.
unturned, and the revenue cycle is never ever completely fixed. So there's always something to be tweaked or done. We recommend to take a look at it every 2-3 years to make sure that it's fine tuned as much as possible. You look at your supply chain costs, and of course, last but not least, two things I think need to happen simultaneously. You need to be as operationally efficient as you possibly can be, which means trying to get to some kind of margin. All right, fighting hard to do that, and then while you're doing that, so you're cleaning up your house, and then while you're doing that, then you need to make the decision: do we need to align with someone or something that gives us more strength in the market? Okay, bigger is not necessarily better, but it is stronger. And it kind of breaks my heart being a small hospital community guy where you had a great interaction with your community. All right. And I think you lose that when you become part of a bigger entity. To a certain extent, you lose that connection. You lose that identity. You lose your own personal culture, which gets melded into the larger enterprise. But it's the way of the world. So you need to kind of look to see, can I go it alone? Which in many instances now the answer is no, unless you have a great payer mix. And then who do you align with? And just one note on that: if you're going to pursue that strategy at all, get competitive bids. Okay, try to get presented with the best options so you have something to choose from.
I think that's great advice. And I heard two things in, that response that I think are really important to, mention. Number one, you talked about understanding where you are and getting as operationally efficient as possible. And sometimes we see organizations that will only do an organizational assessment when absolutely necessary, or every 10 years, every 5 years. I think it's more important than ever to have that consistent assessment, whether it's every 3 years or every year, just to understand, here's our quick pulse of where we are and what should we be doing next. So more frequent assessments, I think, are definitely important for organizations. And
Yeah.
Strategic plans became very unpopular several years ago for whatever reason. And I understand that it's difficult to have a 3, 5, 10-year strategic plan that doesn't change, but you have to have a plan. And you have to understand what is your strategy, even if you're pivoting or adjusting.
Yeah, it used to be, back 20 years ago, I guess, a strategic plan was something that you looked at over 10 years. No, that's too long now. It's got to be like a 3-year period, because the market is changing so rapidly. I'll give you a good example. One example of a hospital that I think really was visionary. We do a lot of work for Boca Raton Regional Hospital in Florida. Wealthy area, great payer mix, great foundation. And so a number of years ago, they decided, I guess they saw the tea leaves and decided, we better align with a bigger entity because that's the way the business is going. Okay. And so they aligned with Baptist Health South Florida, and it's worked out magnificently. Now, you counterpose that with one of the hospitals I ran, which, Boca Raton was not in any desperate situation by any means. One of my hospitals was in a desperate situation, and they still couldn't bite the bullet and make a change.
I think that's a great example, and it definitely highlights leadership and how important leadership is to these decisions. So what role do you think that leadership plays in today's environment, and what might be lacking?
The first thing that comes to mind is being visionary, okay? Because it's very hard to get people to change. This is an environment where, as a leader, you're a change agent. Okay. I mean, you can have your lieutenants maintain the status quo and keep things running, on a day-to-day basis. But if you're in a lead position in any organization, you have to be looking out for, where is the business going and how do I get there before I become desperate. Okay. And the second thing is communicate, particularly during tough times, because I've seen it too many times where when times are tough, leadership is hard to find, okay? Because they don't like taking tough questions or they don't like being confronted by their employees. You want to do the exact opposite thing, okay? You want to over-communicate what's going on, even if it's bad news. People, if you're honest with people and you share the bad news, most likely than not, they'll hang in there with you.
I think one of the, foundational pieces is if you're not communicating and you're not sharing the bad news, your team is going to lose trust in you. And if the team loses trust in you and your capabilities to lead, then everything else falls apart. So nothing else exists without the trust. And if you're not telling, the facts and you're not sharing and communicating that, people are going to lose trust in your ability to actually identify the vision and steer the ship in the right direction.
And, you never know if you share some of your distress and challenges. Employees are a great resource. They may come up with some ideas and thoughts that you hadn't thought of. I call it the employee ranks, the best, probably cheapest consulting organization you'll ever have. You got to tap into the genius of that employee base. Although, decisions right now are such that uh, I think leadership at the top levels of the organization have some real challenges and some tough decisions to make.
I would agree with that. And with that in mind, Mike, when you're thinking about leadership of these hospitals and the struggles that they're going through right now, what might be a piece of advice that you would give to, the CEO, the CFO, the COO to help them better understand what they need to do to communicate, to set that vision, to, really communicate the vision down to the ranks of the employees?
Well,
What
one
would
of the
be
things
your
that comes
advice?
immediately to mind, I think this is an expression someone gave me not too long ago. It's be among us, okay, in terms of relating to the employees and make be visible and in touch. Okay, that's what people want to see. Now, you might not be able to get all the messaging across that they need to hear, but they want to see top leadership. Most of the communication, most of the day to day things they need to know will come from their department managers and vice presidents. But leadership does need to be visible through in many different forums, whether it be open houses or blogs or email blasts, that kind of thing. That to me is it's the most important thing. Just keeping people informed as to what's going on and what your strategy is and why you're doing the things you're doing. And that's where you got to paint this picture of why the status quo is not going to be acceptable. And quite honestly, in this environment, it never is. Okay, if you're not looking to change something, you're probably falling behind the curve, and you want to be proactive with your changes, and that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, in today's environment, change is everywhere. And I love the, phrase be among us. And one of my early mentors told me you cannot lead
No,
from your office. If every time I'm looking for you, I find you in your office, that's an indication to me that you're not doing your job. So I think that's always, good advice as well. You have to be out among the staff. You have to be visible. You have to lead
well,
from the front.
that's a great point. And while everybody strives for work life balance, I mean, there's a lot of hours in the day. Okay, I mean, some of the paperwork stuff you can do in the evening or early in the morning, but once you're on site, and I know a lot of stuff is going more virtual these days for sure. But particularly in the hospital world, where a lot of it is, it's hands on. Your nurses, clinicians, others, they have to be there. It's hands on work. You need to be there with them.
Absolutely do. So, what do you think might be a mindset shift or a change of direction that leaders might need to embrace, to drive change right now? You talked about the fact that change is happening all the time. And in some cases, leaders are not necessarily prepared for that. So, what do we have to do to shift our mindset to really embrace today's pace? Things are
Well,
changing so
again,
quickly.
as you know, I teach a course in strategic planning and marketing, and we talk about market-based decisions. Okay, what's the market doing? You want to stay ahead of the market as you possibly can, and be proactive about where you need to go. Like for instance, right now we're talking a lot about and the business has shifted this way more toward ambulatory services. Back in the day, it used to be 80/20 inpatient to outpatient revenue. Now it's almost completely flipped. Okay, home care is a part of the equation. The hospital at home, smart homes and all that stuff. AI is now going to be introduced, I think, across the board, which needs to be managed in a good way. But some of the changes that need to be embraced and thought about. In terms of where is the business going? Not too long ago, I heard an expression that probably within 10 years, the hospital is not going to be the predominant destination for healthcare. It might be for critically ill. I mean, our population is aging. You have a lot of chronic care, but as the younger population moves, when that cohort continues to move through the system, more and more will be done on an outpatient basis. Telemedicine. How are we going to adjust to all that? And then on top of it all is the reimbursement system. Okay, this whole value proposition and quality incentives. How we factor all that in, because we're still hanging on pretty tightly to fee for service. The more volume, the better, and over time that's going to change.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think 10 years might actually be longer than it's actually going to happen. I think we might be looking at a shorter time frame based off of, what we're seeing. And more importantly, another shift is I think we have to be prepared for, our healthcare systems basically, based off of what happens once you're sick. And, once you present to the hospital and you have a chronic situation or you're already sick, and I do start to see the inklings of a shift to the chronic prevention of care and, nutrition and what happens and how can we prevent that. And I don't believe as an industry that we're fully aware of what that's going to mean and how we can embrace that and better utilize our dietitians, better utilize our physical therapy departments. What opportunities do we have to use the resources we already have in place with the laboratory and other things to prevent something from occurring?
That's a great point. I think to a certain extent, these high deductible health plans, insurance plans are trying to force that, because some of those high deductible plans, it's really catastrophic insurance. If you're really, really sick, that's when those plans come into play. So, before you go spending a lot of money out of your own pocket, you really need to think about, how can I stay healthy? Okay, that's got to be a focus. And your point about, turning to other deliverers of care. It used to be that, pharmacists, all you did in the pharmacy was, go shop around and buy some, incidental items and then pick up your meds. Now I'm seeing more and more people asking pharmacists for advice, clinical advice. And, it just seems harder and harder to get an appointment with your PCP. Wait times are long. Med Expresses and Urgy clinics are, I think there's probably going to be more patronage there. Okay. People, I always break things down in terms of, quality, cost, and access. All right. And access is, people don't want to be inconvenienced. It's like an immediate gratification society. I got a problem. I want it fixed now. All right. I don't want to have to wait, 3, 4, 5 months before it gets addressed.
Yes, we've touched upon so many great points and, shared so much great information, Mike. And, you shared, some key points for healthcare leaders and executives to understand what they need to know now. We talked about strategy and vision and how you balance the revenue cycle and personnel and, what leaders need to do best. What is some of the best leadership advice or business advice that you would like to leave everyone with now? If you could, let our listeners know one or two things that you want to make sure you share with them before we conclude today.
Yeah, there were two things that I would want to point out. It's such a dynamic business that, if you have to change jobs or you're maybe forced to change jobs, one lesson I learned is this: make sure you're going to something and not just away from something. Okay, as difficult as maybe your job is right now, and you're thinking, it's greener on the other side of the fence. Make sure you do your research and understand what you're going to, because it could always be worse. And I had one of those scenarios where I was really in a tough situation. Left that and went to another organization. It was worse, and principally because I didn't do as much research as I probably should have done. And then the other lesson that I've learned over time is that as a leader, be humble. Okay, do your job. The buck does stop with you, but don't let it get to your head. One of my favorite expressions anymore is there are two kinds of people: those who have been humbled and those who are about to be. And I don't think anybody escapes that. So I think if you can do your job, I like to say approach your business being firm and fair, but don't let it get to your head and think you're bigger than your organization, because you're not.
I like that, especially the humble part. One of my sayings is always you have to be humble and hungry. And I think that really speaks to that as well. Where can our listeners find you? If they're looking for revenue cycle support and they need to locate revenue cycle solutions, or they simply want to follow you and reach out to you, what would be the best way
our
for them to
website,
contact you?
www.revenuecyclesolutions.com.
Any last
I
thoughts?
would say this: people want concrete. What should I do? Give me the answer. In terms of expenses and revenues, I always say, cut deeper than you have to. If you're going to cut expenses, cut deeper than you have to, and without impacting safety and quality, if that's at all possible. Okay, and then on the revenue side, that's a complicated equation, but you need to look at that, particularly right now. Whether it be through physician recruitment, your payer contracts, or the entire revenue cycle. You've got to be addressing all those things at the same time.
I think that's great advice on the cut deeper than you have to. And when you're thinking about the cut deeper, it's more than just cutting deeper. It's improve the margin more than you think you have to. You know, sometimes we have organizations that are losing $1 million, $2 million a month, and that's what they're looking to improve by, when really they need to be looking at the 3 million. You know, what would it take for us to get to the 3? Because if you're only looking at the 1, you're going to be doing that every single year. So that if you're cut deeper than you have to make sure you're improving by a factor of what you need, so that you're not doing it every single year and you can get onto
the other thing that, part of the equation is that, the more revenues you can bring in, maybe the less you have to cut.
And that goes back to the vision and strategy and, expanding your service line offerings.
Very true.
Well, thank you, Mike. This has been so much fun. I really appreciate you joining us today. As always, our interviews and sessions are really important. So appreciate you being on the show. And for everyone else, be sure that you follow Altius at altiushcg.com. Look for us on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and Instagram. And we look forward to you joining us for the next session of Altius Interviews.
Thanks, Stephanie. Nice being with you.